Dan brought this to my attention, but another option that potentially would be available to us is blend and extend. And let me explain this concept just generally speaking. Blend and extend is the ability to make future purchases and leverage that lower cost in the future back against higher cost supply in the nearer term. So when we talk about blend and extend, we talk about potentially extending agreements or purchasing in 16 and 17 and blending that savings back across previous years, okay, in 14 and possibly 15. So a blend and extend option would involve making purchases with a counterparty in 16 and 17 at current market conditions and taking those costs, which we believe to be lower, and spreading some of that savings back across 14 and 15 to whereas 16 and 17 prices come up and 14 and 15 come down, and you're averaging the cost over those 4 years. This is an alternative that can be considered. There are a couple drawbacks associated with this, I believe. One is really the entity that's in the prime spot to be able to help us do this is Morgan Stanley, the entity that we have purchases through today. More than likely, I'll go out on a limb here, it's possible that they could be at the front of every block power purchases we made and the lowest cost provider in the future. But if you sole source with Morgan Stanley, chances are they're not going to put their best foot forward. So you're not likely to get the most competitive pricing for 16 and 17 in this alternative. The counterbalance to that is they are in the driver's seat to be able to say, okay, we'll offer you a product in 16 and 17 and we'll blend that back over 14 and 15 with your current purchases, taking into account time, value of money, and all these things, and try to give you a blended look. So there is some potential to be able to blend the pricing if you did this type of alternative. But again, there is some drawback because you limit competition on the future supply. There's not really a way around that in terms of blend and extend. A lot of counterparties would prefer to just talk about 16 and 17 rather than a blending of other years into 16 and 17. But it is an alternative and one that we should talk about in terms of, offering future, taking away from some of those future discounts and bringing some of those back forward.
I would call that the loan shark effect, because that's basically what they are. You're borrowing money from them to lower your rates, and they're going to charge it for it at the end. And I personally don't like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a time value of money question. You're taking from your discount and you're borrowing from those years and bringing it back to previous years and spreading out the cost. That's essentially what's being done.
I mean, especially instead of paying $71 a kilowatt hour 2 years from now or 3 years from now, we're going to pay $73 and then lower our kilowatt hours down to the same amount. So it just matters what's that amount they're looking to sell the power towards that.
Yeah.
It's not time value of money where you're going to place it ahead or behind. It's just, it all depends on the numbers. Is it 68 cents or $68, $69, what is it?
Well, we'll give you a kind of a picture of what we think it might look like and let you kind of think about it in that light. Here's the slide we showed earlier about forward costs, 16 and 17 being in the mid to upper 70s there per megawatt hour. This is an example look of what it might look like to blend and extend to take those the discount being in the mid to upper 70s in 2016 and 17 and bringing that cost back on 14 and 15. I do want to point out that this is strictly an example. This isn't supported by some proposed offer. And basically what we've done is nominally move dollars around, okay, on a nominal basis, and give you an illustration of what it might look like to move the cost in 16 and 17 from the 70s up to this $90 level and what type of relief that might provide. I do want to stress that the costs prior to 14 here are conservatively high. AMP has assisted us in helping to get some off-system sales of excess in some of these previous years to get these costs down lower. For example, I believe 2012's budget for the Boro was in the 9850 range. So, you know, these are more of a purest view on where costs are would be today. And of course, through some off-system sales and whatnot, we've been able to bring the cost down to around the upper 90s, 9850 for example, in 12. So, you know, the blend and extend would give you some potential to move your wholesale costs down. Probably not out of the 90s in terms of cost per megawatt hour. But you would be able to blend it. I do want to mention that, you know, it looks nice and flat there from 14 to 17. And that's a little bit of a misnomer because, of course, we blended the dollars to make it look flat. And to some degree, you can do that with the energy pricing. It's that portion on the bottom, the PJM cost, that could be variable and could change. So you got to recognize that it's not just going to go to a flat product and you don't have to worry about it. $90, we're done, let's take it. It's not that type of arrangement. One, we have to go out and find an entity who can provide this type of offer in this structure. And then we would still have to concern ourselves with the volatility of PJM costs to potentially change these costs.
Eric, did you say that would prohibit our portfolio? In other words, we'd locked in to one product. We wouldn't be able to layer our portfolio like we plan to do. So we're not depending on one source. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, that's a byproduct of doing this alternative is that you need all the leverage in 16 and 17 that you can get. So you basically have to lock in all of your requirements in 16 and 17 in order to have savings to leverage back. So you would be completely committed in 16 and 17. We would be sort of, I guess, back to a situation where you're locked in fully for all your needs out 5 years from now for 17. So we would get away from, it's definitely a contrast to portfolio approach and layering in pieces. This would, you know, lock in all of your needs in 16 and 17 and move to this blended methodology. So that's really the question here is,
It would just need to be extremely cheap in order for it to make sense.
yes.
We have to commit a rate, just a number with no premium for the back payment, or the current costs in 13, 14. Right, there's got to be premium there, and then go to one side.
Yeah, they're going to want some premium associated with first just executing a deal like this, and two, they're probably going to take a little premium whether we like it or not, and the fact that Morgan Stanley's in the right position to do an offer. It's definitely a premium product, but it accomplishes the blend, the blending purpose, and the question is how valuable is that to us and where we are. So it doesn't look like we get a cost out of the 90s per megawatt hour, all of it.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Okay. This sort of I'll concentrate on the strategy here, but really this reiterates the 2016 and 17 plan that we've laid out in terms of portfolio is that we would move down from our block of 7150 shown there for Exelon. We would be moving from our 7150 7x24 block down to another 5x16 component. What we would propose if we move forward with a portfolio approach is to layer in possibly a 5-year block of 5x16 supply beginning in 2016. We believe that price would be lower than the 7150 that we had previously obtained. And again, that's an on-peak product versus an around-the-clock product. So again, we'd be, in a sense, cost averaging down on that energy from 7150. And then additionally, layer in annual power blocks on 16 and 17. Those would be significantly cheaper than the 5x16 block. So it's this idea of cost averaging downward on our 16 and 17 requirements from 7150 for the long-term block to something smaller for the 5-year 5x16 block, to something even smaller for our needs, annual needs in 2016 and 17. And trying to move that cost average down to a level that on a weighted average basis is lower than significantly lower than where we are today. Again, the 16 and 17 target that we've laid out is 70% of the energy requirements. This is a key area for your feedback time. Is that an appropriate target, which would be an additional 50% to purchase essentially in the near term? Is that appropriate? Is that enough? Is that too much? We feel like that's appropriate in light of the comments that we heard last time, which was we want a significant portion of the 16 and 17 needs locked down so that we can ensure that the cost decrease is going to occur at that point in time.
Is it always a 5-year? I mean, you don't have anything less than that?
No. We're kind of diversifying returns here. So the previous block that we had at 7150 was actually 70.
Right.
It was around the clock 7150, starting at 16. The 5-year block we're talking about is less than that. And again, it's only a 5-year term. And then we're talking about layering on top of that annual block purchases for 16 and 17 only. Those would be even cheaper. So we're talking about a blended mix here.
So we don't have to have 70% in a 5-year, it's variable.
It's not 70, yeah, let me correct that. It's not 70% in the 5-year. It's 70% in 16 and 17 only.
Okay.
We're focusing a greater percentage of the needs to be locked in 16 and 17 to deal with the thought or sentiment that we want greater price assurance in 16 and 17 at some cost that's lower than where we are today. So recognize beyond 17, we're at a much smaller percentage. And that's the next stage we're going to talk about is how do we roll forward in post-2017. So keep that number in your mind. It is 70% appropriate. Is another 50% today for 16 and 17 appropriate, given the cost levels you've seen, to lock in greater price assurance and show that decrease in cost. Here's what that would look like according to what we would plan to purchase if council agreed to move in this direction. 71% of your needs in 16, for example, would be locked in. Today, you already have the bottom blue portion, which is Exelon's 7x24 block at 7150. We would be proposing to lock in an additional annual block for 16, which would be just that calendar year. And that's shown in yellow. That's a significant portion of the needs. That's only that 1 year. That pricing would be much less. And then we're talking about that part just above that, which is 5x16 annual needs, as being some type of 5-year block. And again, that price would be less than 7150. So we're layering in, we would be layering in 71% in total of our needs in 2016 and 17.
Gary, if we did this, when would we need to make that decision?
Well, we would just agree that this strategy or approach is acceptable, that it does in fact achieve a cost reduction on the energy that we've locked in. Of course, it doesn't account for the other 30%. And then we would make plans to move forward with that, have discussions perhaps with American Municipal Power and lock in additional power blocks in the market.
Do those rates fluctuate daily? Like the stock market?
Yeah, absolutely. The cost of these types of products are very much
So
time
you have
sensitive.
trends and you can pretty much know if it's low and you know if it's good or not.
Well, that's part of what our strategy is attempting to do is remove the emotion from managing the portfolio. It's like, okay, historically it's been all right, we're going to lock in all of our needs. When should we do it? And we want to kind of get away from that strategy. I mean, hopefully you're not up late at night thinking about your entire retirement or 401k portfolio sitting in one single stock and whether or not it's the right time to buy or sell. It's a diversified mix of different resources, different products, and that's what we're talking about here. Is less about timing market for absolute lows, but more about achieving objectives for cost stability that makes sense for the borough, and a longer-term plan of hedging in different components over time. So what we're representing here is hedging in additional components up to 70% in each years, and that representing a cost average that is decreasing in those years, substantially from the estimates that we showed.
Excuse me, the 70% is giving us some stability and predictability going into the future. The balance, the 30% that we would pick up over time, gives us further the ability to press things there on an average.
Yeah, that's right. And to further illuminate on that, of course, you remember the Exelon block was 7 years out. We were talking about another 5-year block at the top there. That's a smaller percentage. But then you have calendar year 16 only purchases to give you that price decrease. So you have a little bit of short term that's locked in, a little bit of long term that's locked in, and then this 30% component that we don't lock in yet. We continue to roll forward and look for opportunities on that, and possibly some further price decrease. So again, it's this blend of longer term pieces, shorter term pieces that we lock in, and even that top 30% component that we're not going to lock in for another year, possibly two. So you're taking your time on the approach, you're layering it in over time. You're not in the market all at once. And you have some different components here that are saying, well, a good portion of your needs in 16 or 17 are at a reduced cost.
So within the plan that we'll establish, we need to lock in 2016, 2017 by this date, correct?
Correct.
We want to look at it over time. Can we lock in and say 2014 for 2016? Do you see those abilities within the market?
Yeah, absolutely. You can, it's specifically as you get closer to the top portion of your load, you can see that it's more of a shaped product, right? It's not something that you can do annually as much as it is very shapeable. That product is a premium product the earlier you go to try to buy it. So the closer you get to it is the right time to be considering that kind of product. And what we're suggesting is that no earlier than 2 years before the delivery period would you consider those types of shorter-term monthly purchases. I think in our plan, we recommend that shorter term makes up approximately 25% of the borough's annual energy requirements at any given point in time. So we're waiting inside the 2-year window for 25% of our needs. And then we'll separate this by long-term, mid-term, and short-term in a moment. But 25% roughly of our energy requirements will be invested in that shorter term.
You're talking about January of 2014. No, earlier in January of 2014, about almost 30%.
Correct. And of course, we're not locked into anything here. This is a strategy. It's all subject to modification, right? But it is a mark. It is a target. And we set that target and we say this is our ideal, and we see where things go. But we need to strive to. If you're going to move with this type of approach, you strive to move away from the emotional aspect of purchasing and more to a diversified approach, independent of where market is moving.
You sound like my stockbroker.
Well, ironically, in this market, we're managing a financial portfolio. We've gone from a purely physical market historically to now in PJM one purely financial. And so we really do have to think about these things in terms of more of a financial context. I went too in depth with that, but you really do have to kind of think about it.
But I think it helps us with the opportunities that we've seen come across the desk. How does it all fit in?
Right.
And that's where I've stumbled with them. It seems like we're building a criteria for forward thinking in terms of how these projects fit in and what it can do to our wholesale costs as we move forward.
And that's the key, is knowing when a product comes across your desk, what bucket does it fit into? And that's what we want to emphasize here. Long-term, mid-term, short-term, how are those defined? We're going to define those in greater detail here in just a moment, and hopefully that'll clear up any thoughts about that. So just for example, when 2014 rolls around, we would look to put in these additional components that are shaped throughout 2016 to shore up the energy requirements for that year, anytime in 14 and possibly some even in early 15. So that's how you stack these in, you layer them in over time. All right, so post 2017. Post 2017 really rolls into our long-term procurement plan. How would we layer in? What would be the layering approach? And these years don't contemplate us going out and buying up a bunch of power now in order to be sure that costs are decreasing. That's what we're thinking about for 16 and 17. But in 18 and beyond, we're just really thinking about the potential to manage some of that cost today, but not a large percentage of it. And then when we get closer to that term, we would start to make different procurements throughout time. This strategy, as I mentioned, discourages chasing lowest prices in the market and removes the highs and lows from procurement. Again, we've laid out much of the strategy, but this also lays out timing for those different components of the purchases, and I'll try to communicate that here in just a moment. Let's given our time and where we are right now, let's go ahead and move past these slides that are a bit more detailed, and essentially get to slide number 22 here. So you see here on slide 22 the overall energy requirements that we would be locking in. Today, what we're talking about locking in is, of course, we already have the blue on the bottom of the Exelon block. That's already there. We are talking about locking in the 5x16 component that is third from the bottom as a next step item, which would last 5 years, starting in 16. So that would still be there in 18, 19, and 20. We're not talking about moving any further than that. Now you see these other annual blocks that we might consider, and that's wonderful, but we're not talking about moving any further today than the Exelon block in blue that we've already purchased, and the 5x16 block, which is third from the bottom, and looks black on this slide here, it's dark green on the handouts. That is the extent of what we would look at today. As we got closer to that term, 2018 for example, we would start considering layering in portions of that yellow annual block. Okay, that would be as we got closer to the term. It would not be something we consider today. And again, here's ultimately what that would look like with the shaping. Slide 24. This outlines really what we were talking about earlier in terms of the importance of shape. You can tell from the slides and information we've talked about thus far, we think shaping is pretty important to the borough's future purchases. We have been pretty blocky in the past, and I'll use that term loosely because it's kind of slang, but we bought a lot of annual block power needs, and it doesn't have a lot of sensitivity to the seasonality of the borough's load. It's what we discussed earlier, the volatility potentially being there. You might have excess, you might be short. It's hard to put a block on a seasonal load and expect all of that to work out exactly. So we just want to put greater emphasis, we believe, in the future on shaping these products. There is a little bit more premium in buying the monthly shaped products. We address that by moving those purchases closer to the delivery term. The shaped products you would buy closer to the point when you need them, and the annual blocks you would buy further away. And that helps to control that premium associated with buying those shaped products, because you're buying them closer to term. They're more likely to be more heavily traded in the market, and you're not paying excessive premium for those. And while you're doing that, you're managing your market risk. You'll have a smaller number of market purchases and sales, and that will provide greater cost stability, particularly throughout the year. It would be especially helpful to the folks managing the cash flows and finances on a monthly basis your seasonal curve, but some of it doesn't. So you're always going to have these variations that have to be managed. But again, moving to a little bit more shaped product helps to manage some of those issues and take them off the table. All right. So let's kind of focus the conversation back to the different buckets here. What are the different buckets of our needs and how much goes in each bucket and what does those represent? Today, we have the plan here proposed for a long-term, a mid-term, and short-term component. We just talked about the short-term component being anything inside of 2 years, and that representing approximately 25% of the borough's needs. Okay? That would be seasonal and monthly purchases, shaped products, things that aren't standard products on the market. So let's back up to the top. Long-term, given where prices are now and kind of the lower atmosphere of natural gas, we see a longer-term component possibly being more of 40%. I mean, a big chunk of your overall needs that creates longer-term stability. Between the Exelon block that you have today that's 7 years long and the 5-year product that we're talking about, that would make up a good chunk of that, but not all of it. And it would leave opportunities, as Matt alluded to, for future purchases that might be longer term in nature. So if something came across your desk, an opportunity for long term that we brought you, it would fit into that category, and we could potentially put more eggs in another basket for long term needs. Again, this comes to other opportunities that have come. We've reviewed EDI landfill project in the past. We're looking at wind as an alternative. You know, many of these projects represent longer term alternatives and to offer cost stability, so they fall in that long-term bucket. The midterm component is everything that remains, which we target at 35% of your annual energy needs right now. That would consist of annual and seasonal block purchases that we layer in methodically between 2 and 4 years before your delivery period. And I'll shorten that here, possibly even more emphasis on 2 to 3 years prior to the delivery year. You would begin to start layering in components. And possibly you might consider a strategy that lays it in every 6 months, some component of that midterm need. So you might have some resources in long term. You're waiting until you're inside 2 years for short term. And in between those two, you're layering in different chunks throughout time. Again, not accentuating any competitive market at any given time. So here's what that example might look like. Let's kind of concentrate on the different periods here that we're talking about, okay? And I know this gets involved, but I'm just trying to break down some type of illustration. Of course, through 12 and 13, you're already covered up your needs today. In 14 and 15, we're talking about locking in 23%. That's a near-term strategy to go ahead and get that done. In 16 and 17, we're talking about locking you in up to 75% roughly or 71% to go ahead and get that portion of your needs locked in, again, for greater price assurance. So beyond 2017 is when we start working on this longer-term approach. It's layering in an additional 25% of your long-term needs to make up the 40%. It's layering in that portion of midterm need. Again, that's done methodically, perhaps every 6 months, 2 to 3 years before that delivery period. And then you'll always have that short-term component from 16 all the way out that will be layered in on some shorter-term basis inside 2 years. So again, this solidifies the types of buckets we're talking about in terms of resource alternatives. You have long-term options that are really 5 years or more. You have this midterm buckets that's between 2 and 4 year products. And you have the short-term market inside of 2 years that you start looking at these shaped products. This lays out an approach for how we will roll into that long-term procurement while addressing our short-term goal for 16 and 17 and also